Welcome everyone to the Michigan Historic Preservation Network August webinar. My name is Xiaohanbao Smith. I will be your moderator. And today we are going to hear about the Milton, a Battle Creek gem returns. Before we get started, I would like to go over some Zoom items. If you have any questions, please type them into the Q&A box as you think of them. All the questions will be answered at the end of the presentation. If you have any technical difficulties, please also type them into the Q&A box. The chat box will be used to share links or resources discussed during the webinar. And both the Q&A and chat boxes are located at the bottom of your Zoom screen. If you don't see them, please wiggle your mouse. And please participate in the survey after the webinar concludes. If this is your first time attending our webinar, we are the Michigan Historic Preservation Network. We support the sustainability and economic viability of Michigan's historic places through advocacy, education, and direct action. We could not do the work we do without our members or volunteers. So if you're not a member yet, please consider joining us at www.mhpn.org. And our webinar series is sponsored in part by an award from the Michigan Arts and Culture Council. And it is my great pleasure today to introduce you our speaker, Randy Case. Randy is a longtime friend of MHPN, and he's a president of Architecture Plus Design. And with that, I am going to turn it over to Randy.
Hello, everybody, and welcome from Battle Creek. I guess you can go to the next slide. When the Old Merchants National Bank was first designed, this was like the cover page of the brochure that was handed out to people that opened accounts. And you see is an architectural expression of high ideals, conscientious devotion to civic responsibility. And you can tell that it was always part of the community, and the community felt really strongly about this structure, and that's the way they wanted it to be. Next slide. This is also one of the brochures that came out, and the building was designed by Weary and Alford in Chicago, they were famous for doing buildings around the country. And in their comments about the building, they talked about the fact that it was modern but not modern, and it had no garish embellishments like in the past. So they're obviously rebelling against the more decorative work in the earlier years. And what happened is this building in the Central National Bank, this was the Old Merchants National Bank originally. And so the Central National Bank was also being built, and they were competing banks. And so there was a big race to see who would top out first. And what happened is the Old Merchants National Bank lost the race to the Central National Bank. So what they did was they added another floor, so it's the tallest building in Battle Creek. And so next slide, please. This was again part of the brochure that was sent out showing the way the atriums would be and when they're completed. And this was the first bank in America that had escalators. And so that was a big deal to them to show that the escalators were there. Next slide. Now this was the Old Merchants National Bank that was originally built in the 1800s. And this building was right next door to the new building that was going on. And what happened is they wanted to stay in business as long as they could while they were doing the new construction. And that's why they lost the race, because they had to work around this building. And you'll notice the chandeliers that are hanging in their little wagon wheel chandeliers, those were actually salvaged and reused in a slightly uh, more modern form in the new building in the side aisles. So you'll keep an eye out for that when you see some of the next pictures. Okay, the next picture, please. Okay, now what happened? The Depression came right after the building was completed. It was completed in 31, and in the Depression, everything shut down in 1933. And what happened with this bank is the Kellogg Company um, wanted to make sure that everybody had faith in banking. So what they did is their treasurer, George C. McKay, was gifted from the Kellogg Company to be the CEO of the Old Merchants National Bank. And when it reopened, and it was called Security National Bank at that time. And again, security was the name of the game after the Depression. And all the Kellogg employees were encouraged to put their money in savings and do their banking with Security National Bank. And again, that was a sense of the pride in the community and the fact that Kellogg Company wanted the community to be strong. And when I moved to Battle Creek, that's the place where I got my first checking account and savings account and everything. And it was just an interesting thing of how everybody pulled together to make sure this was successful. And this was like a centerpiece of downtown. It's in the middle of the block and is a very imposing presence. Comerica Bank, well, just a second here. We need to go on a little further. So next slide, please. This was the way the atrium lobby looked in 1985. It was purchased by the Comerica Company in 82, and they ran the bank for a number of years. And there was a club on the top called the Athelstan Club. It was in that 19th floor. It was a special place, that you had to have a membership to and all that kind of thing. And Comerica, when they took over that building, they gutted out the Athelstan Club and turned it into some of their offices, and to the chagrin of a lot of the people in the community, because they really thought the Athelstan Club was the place to be. Um, anyway, they purchased it in um, 1982, and they left it in 1985, unfortunately. Um, Next slide, please. So from 1985 on, we had all kinds of issues with, keeping the building safe and sound and all that, because there weren't very many tenants. And let's see here. And it was, kind of going to seed. And there's a little, I don't know if you can read that slide. It's probably a little small. Let me see if I can get something here. Well, what happened is it went through the years back and forth to a bunch of different people who couldn't make it go. And then in 1985, I believe, um, oh, I'm sorry, it was 1993. It was sold to Art Door. And Art Door owned the largest demolition country in the state. He was based in Saginaw. And what he was doing is he was piecing out parts of the building and selling them. And we were really concerned about that. The bank vault, where they had these brass um, boxes that people would keep their jewelry and so forth. And they had mirrors in there so ladies could try on the jewelry before they left and all this. That was completely gutted, and all the bright pieces and so forth were sold off. So we were pretty concerned about that. So in 1989, um, the Southwest chapter of AIA Michigan had their convention in town. And what we did to bring awareness of that, we invited the public to this. It was all empty and vacant at the time. And so we had our president, David Jarl, at that year, stand at the top of the stairs, and we filled the space with stage smoke, and it's basically like a fog. And we did a laser show up through that. When the fog was there, then the laser lines would show all over the place. And we ran it around in a bunch of different directions and played um, Nataro, God of Thunder, and there was thunder and lightning, and we created a storm in the building, and the laser lights hit the gold leaf and reflected all over the place. And it was quite an awareness thing. And what happened is when we had that stage smoke come out, Dave Jarl walked out of the stage smoke and greeted people. Yeah, and he's a very not assuming guy, and so this was it was uh, pretty nerve-wracking for him, but he did a great job, and it was a really fun event. So it brought people's awareness to the building. Okay, next, please. The team that took over the project in 2017 was headed up by the developer Mark Harmson from Rockford, Michigan. And he was a very great asset to this project because he was a friendly, warm guy and very knowledgeable and very unflappable. There was a lot of things that went on in this thing to have it keep going, and he always kept a positive sense about things and treated people with respect. The primary architect was Integrated Architecture out of Grand Rapids, and Ed Kulikowski was the project manager. And they did the design and the layouts and the floor plans and all those kind of things and got the mechanical systems going and all. Our construction manager was the Chrisman Company, and Zach Bosma was the project manager for the construction manager. And then I served as the preservation architect. The Kellogg Foundation came to the table with funds and grants, and the Battle Creek Community Foundation did the same thing. Michigan Economic Development Corporation, Battle Creek Unlimited, the City of Battle Creek, and the Michigan Community Revitalization Program. And I've heard also that the retired Kellogg employees put some funds into that as well from the portfolio that it was set out for the group. So you can see there was a lot of interest in all this happen. So let's move on to the next slide. So this is what happened when we took over in 2017. The building had been left vacant, and um, the roofs were not kept in good shape. And above the skylights and the atriums there were glass blocks set in iron frames. And over the years, the seals had broken, and kids had somehow gotten into the building. They always had to keep, sending police into the building because if there was a window knocked out, then everybody wanted to, climb around and see what's inside. And kids had thrown concrete blocks out of the upper floors they thought it was big fun to break the glass blocks on the top. And so anyway, water was everywhere. And so these are just some of the before shots. When we saw it, there was about an inch and a half of ice because we started it in the winter months to do the first assessments and so forth. And then you can see on the right side, um, there was there's the old vault that had been stripped of all its interesting characteristics inside. And everything had fallen off the walls and the ceilings were all rough. And you can see in the lower left-hand corner, this was the primary corridor, and a lot of the ceilings had fallen there. And then the lower right corner is a photograph taken in the northwest corner, looking out the front facade. So just to give you a little sense of how rough things were. Next slide, please. Okay, and on the left side, you can see they were all um, iron windows, and they were operated, by little cranks and so forth. But everything was gone, and a lot of the windows were broken out. And you can see out that window where that glass block skylight was, and you see, actually it was wired glass, um, and you can see a lot of the broken pieces and parts and so forth. The upper right-hand corner was a photograph of the ornament on the top of the Milton. Um, in the lower left-hand corner is one of the chandeliers um, that was designed by the architect for this building, and just showing all what was intact. You can see the just above the chandelier on the right side, the plaster was on metal lath and steel ribs, and that metal lath had all rusted through, so they had to reconstruct just about everything and had to replaster that whole ceiling. In the lower right, you can see um, when Comerica had control of the building, they had put like a metal box over the black granite, and a couple of tenants had filled in with kind of exposed aggregate panels and all kinds of crazy things that happened through the years. Okay, next slide. Now this is, we had we ran a little drone through the space to kind of get a feel of things, and you can see looking down into that chandelier how all of the connecting pieces to the glass and so forth were rusted out, and it was just barely hanging together. And then again, you can see in the floor below, um, all the plasters on the floor. In the upper right hand panel, you can see this was kind of a figured glass in kind of like an orange color that was in the rotunda in the dome. And so that was all, um, people had to find it and replace that glass. And BlackBerry Systems did a nice job of working on these things. Lower left-hand corner, you can see the plaster is rough and kind of ready to cave, and it was a little grill that had a nice detail to it. It just showed a little picture. And the lower right-hand corner is that vault with the door open, so you can see it was all covered with rust, and everything was on the floor and no finishes were present. Next slide, please. And these are before shots of the atrium. And actually they look better because you didn't, on the left side, you don't see the ceiling. That was looking down the elevator towards the front door. Upper right-hand corner is, an overall of the dome. And it looks like what happened is the construction manager, put a tarp up to start with to stop the water coming in. You can see the floor is dry for a change, and there's no ice on it. So it took a lot of time to get that roof squared away because there weren't stable things to attach to, and ended up putting insulation layer on top of the old frames where the glass block was and making a structure up there, and it sealed it in. We put lighting underneath that over the dome so they wouldn't have to worry about water coming in there. On the lower left, you can see the main column on the far left. All the plaster was gone, and there was a lot of metal lath and stuff hanging there. So again, just a picture of the damage that water has done. Next slide. And here's kind of an intermediary time when the floors have been cleaned up at least, and the ceilings have been removed, and they started to work on things. Um, there's a little bit of an arched ceiling that was in front of that original vault lobby, and that was a pretty high class lounge initially. Um, we actually saved the that little arched system. So if somebody wanted to put that back, they'd have the frame. It was as a stepped pattern. It started out flat in the middle and stepped 3 times to create a little bit of an arch feeling. So it was cleaned up and just left there, and we put a lay-in ceiling underneath it. Okay, and then the lower left slide is a picture of the elevator lobby. And on the right is um, the lift they put on the outside of the building because the elevators weren't working. And so they created this tower that would, it was a man lift. They had a box that we'd walked into, and they pulled us up to the floor, and you'd walk across a little, um, what would you call a walkway into the building. So again, we just get stuff started. Next slide. Okay. Now on the right side, um, this shows the chandelier that's been lowered down to the floor in the atrium, and you can see all the scaffolding filled up the whole atrium. So we could get up high enough that the plasterers could work and they could get work done on the ceiling. Of course, meanwhile, the places were, fitted with electrical, mechanical systems, and the apartments were being worked on. But the preservation thing was kind of the trickier thing. And so you can see the scaffolding floor there on the left sides of both. And there was, of course, they still couldn't get up to the dome, so the guys had to put scaffolding inside of that. And they had little, like a little hammock-like thing that they would spring from the top of the scaffolding so they could reach the ceilings and paint in a comfortable position. Lower left-hand corner, you can see some of the plaster has started to be reinstalled. Next slide, please. So what happened is on the ceiling, in order to recover the paintings, we found old photographs that had the design and so forth, and we did paint analysis and to get the colors correctly. And because of the dome shape, it was very difficult to get everything to work. So that whole ceiling was scanned with the colors and so forth in the 3D pattern. And there was a graphic arts studio up in Grand Rapids. I think it's called the Guilford um, Press and so forth. And what they did is they created signs and all those kind of things, but they had a CNC router that actually created the stencils for these patterns. And based on that, on the 3D scans that had been done, they accurately formed these shapes. And what they could do is they could take the stencil and pull out the sections and then paint within the stencils. And you see on the left picture, well, the right picture shows the actual drawing that was created that the stencils were made from. And then you can see that on the tape to the wall by the painters, and that was their workspace. And so that was how they figured out, where to put all the pieces in the like the squinches and the arches and so forth. And it was pretty amazing that this actually happened because I don't know how else it could have been done because there wasn't much left to go by. So anyway, next slide. Um, the side aisle light fixtures you can see from that where we talked about from the old um, bank. This one is on the floor and it's been half restored. You can see the tarnish and stuff on the right and how it's been cleaned on the left. And so that um, that upper scaffolding became a workspace as well. And obviously, some of them were taken back to the shop and worked on. The left side, you can see where we're doing brick matching because there were a lot of areas that had spalled and cracks and so forth in the masonry. And then in the lower left-hand corner, there was the first test of the stencil technique, which was pretty amazing because we weren't nobody was sure it was going to work. Next slide. Now this one was another thing that was interesting. Um, we've those windows that you saw, the steel windows, needed to be replicated, but we weren't going to go back and steel. So um, BlackBerry Systems, working with a Quaker, came up with this idea, and we called it the trickle vent. I guess Quaker typically calls it the trim vent. But what happened is we needed to meet the historic standards for the sash size and all these kind of things to make it all look proper on the exterior. But the owner really wanted to have people on a nice day, have them be able to open, have a little air, so you didn't have to use the air conditioning all the time. Of course, again, that would save some cost. So anyway, the trickle vent was incorporated. And in the upper left-hand side, you see, this is a sample that was um, on Mike Shields' desk over at BlackBerry Systems. And the one that we actually used, everything was the same color. It wasn't, it wasn't gray and bronze. They were all the bronze color or black. I can't remember. But anyway, on the left side, that's in the closed position from the inside. And on the right, what happens is you'd stick your finger in that little black notch and you'd slide it to the left. What it would do is it'd pull out an inch away from the window and let the air come through. The outside had a little eyebrow on it. And again, this was a sample, not the actual. So everything was the matched color. And there was a little I think the one that we ended up using was a little smaller than this, the little eyebrow, just to keep the water from out in case it was raining. And then the top view, um, you see there was a little notch that had a insect screen in it, so you wouldn't let bugs in. So anyway, this was a kind of a complicated little thing, and we took the mock-up up to the SHPO's office to have it reviewed to make sure that we were okay. And this was the time when Rob McKay was at the SHPO's office. And um, the little side story there, uh, the George C. McKay from the Kellogg Company that became the president of the bank when it opened as Security National was actually Rob McKay's grandfather. So he had a real interest in this building since he had lived in Battle Creek in the earlier days. Okay, next slide. On the left side, you can see how removed the rust from the bank vault doors and created that into the tenant lounge. There's people back there playing cards. And then you can see in the lower left-hand picture, the space in front and that's where we left the little arch above the lay-in ceiling. And it's a really a very nice place to be. And it's nice to see the old vault shined up and looking nice. It's amazing the thickness of that door and all the mechanisms that go into that door. And then on the upper right is like a typical apartment. Um, they turned out really nice. They're fairly contemporary. And so I think that Integrated did a nice job with that, and the interior designers, I think, selected things well. And it's a nice, clean, simple, modern approach. Next slide. The Kellogg Company was one of the first tenants in the building, and Mark Harnson had talked them into using this as their company store. So this is the special place that Kellogg employees could come down to buy bulk cereal and uh, all kinds of memorabilia and various things, tokens they want to take home to family and friends and all that. And only Kellogg employees are allowed into this space. Anyway, it's the glass with some wheat and so forth, and they had their logo on it. The this is in the main corridor coming from the front door. And you can see how it's cleaned up nicely and looks pretty nice. Um, the last tenant that we're working on amendments for it at this point is United Federal Credit Union, and that's in the lower northwest corner on the first floor where there were no really historic elements that were remaining. So this is a contemporary design. And there's another tenant on the second floor that's Raymond James, and there was a corridor there that had some original marble wainscot and a base that we left in place, and that's um, part of their offices now because and there were also a few of the executives' offices that had fine woodworking in the wall panels and so forth. So those were saved as well. And there was a coffered ceiling with inlaid um, uh, walnut along with mahogany and Brazilian redwood and various things that were saved. So anyway, those are tenant spaces. Next slide. And this is an after shot of the first floor or the second floor, the main lobby as completed. And we introduced the glass wall just so that there could be separation from tenant space. The Raymond James space is on the left side. And halfway, just past the elevator lobby, we put in a clear glass wall that separated their offices, and that was the entry to their space. Next slide. And these are basically how we went. We had a very interesting um, series of discussions with the fire marshal. He wasn't going to let us use the elevators um, because those escalators weren't working and people could trip on them because they didn't have the proper rise and run. And so he wanted us to build a solid wall in front of the escalator on the left because that was close to the elevator um, shaft. This was the elevator inspector, I'm sorry, not the fire marshal. Um, and he would not allow the use of those elevators unless they did this. And so, Rob McKay spent a lot of time, you know, working on that guy to see if he'd change his mind, and he wouldn't. So what we did is we came up with the idea of building these little um, boxes out of plywood and painting them black and then putting flowers on them and poinsettias depending on the time of the year. And that meant that nobody could climb up them. And as a result, well, we didn't have to do that wall. That would have been horrible. So anyway, there's a story behind all the everything you see. And so I don't know how many more slides we have. Maybe that's the last one. Okay. Yeah, this is a picture of it afterwards, after the masonry work's been done on the outside and it's all been cleaned and has received its historic tax credits. So I guess we can take some questions.
Yes, thank you, Randy, for the presentation and all the photos. We do have quite a few questions, so let's get
Okay.
started. Okay, first question. Okay, so except for big global projects in NYC and Dubai, people don't hear much about one building owner trying to have their new building be taller than another. Is this less
Uh-huh.
common nowadays, or does it just not come to public's attention?
I don't really know. I know it was an ego thing for the the Merchants National Bank at the time. It seems to me I've heard of this kind of thing happening in the past, but not much in present history, at least that I'm aware of. I don't really do too many high-rise buildings, so I'm not really able to comment on that. Maybe some other folks would be.
Okay,
Okay.
next question. Was the Milton ever seriously threatened with demolition?
It was. Um, that was why we had the little laser show and all that in the building because there was talk about that because it was so rough and no developers could make a go at it. One developer was from Florida and he had a partner that was a software developer and they wanted to take over the building and they were going to do this software development for him. Something happened between the two and the software developer um, dropped the ball and just walked away. And so the other guy got left holding the bag, and it was really touch and go for a while there. But I think public awareness helped a lot, and um, just thank God that Mark Harmson got involved. There was a development group out of Grand Rapids that bought it, and they hired him to be their project director. I'm trying to remember what it was. It was um, like Restore 616 or 616 Restore or something like that. And then that's how Mark got originally involved in it. And then he saw the value of this and carried on. And he, worked with the community, talking to various funding sources to see how that could work and was successful enough to make this happen.
Okay, next question. When construction materials were damaged beyond repair, did you have any trouble finding replacements?
Well, for the limestone, um, we knew where the quarry was, and limestone, it was in Indiana, and the limestone, the masonry restoration team was RAM out of Grand Rapids, and um, they sourced what they could, and it seemed like it matched fairly well, and that's why the building was cleaned so that you could kind of, mill those replacement pieces a little bit better. Um, in terms of other, let's see what, well, the glass, I believe that, uh, Mike Shields from BlackBerry Systems did a bunch of research to get the figured glass that went back in the skylights and so forth. And then, of course, the paint colors, were research. Ron Koenig did the research on that initially. And then, well, in the light fixtures that were not the chandeliers, the ones in the hallway and so forth, we found um, little rectangular patterns. You know, they had put in some kind of, I would call them glitzy kind of hanging around fixtures that weren't appropriate to the style at all. But luckily, what happened is there was ghost of the rectangular size of the fixtures that were there. And we did find kind of a fuzzy picture of like a linear light that was kind of triangular and had a couple ribs in it. And we found um, fixtures that were very close to that and utilized those in the building. Um, you know, we didn't find the original fixtures and couldn't do anything with that, but we found as close as we could.
Mhm.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, next question. In meeting with the Secretary of Interior Standards for Rehabilitation, what pushback did you get from the State Historic Preservation Office or from the National Park Service? What were the solutions?
We didn't really get much pushback. I worked closely with the SHPO's office through the whole process. And before we proposed things, we worked back and forth with them. The National Park Service, we had no problems at all. Antonio Aquiller had worked with us, in the past, and we knew most of the people, and we knew what the Secretary of Interior standards were, and so we just kind of worked along with it. So we didn't really get any pushback any way along. Um, I I know that when we were looking at the paint colors and some of the things there, we mocked up things and we ran it by. Rob came out and took a look at things, and we just worked together through the whole process. And so we didn't really have many problems at all.
Okay, next question. How did you disable the vault door so it doesn't swing shut or lock?
Oh, the vault door? Yeah. That thing is so heavy. It takes about three people just to move it. But there is a little mechanism originally that was, there's like a clip back there that keeps it from going. And there's also a little fence like that has a little, it's kind of folded back out of the way, but there was they could leave the door of the vent or of the vault open, and then this little door swung off to the right, and both of them are just anchored in the open position. But yeah, it's a massive door, and in order to get it open like that, I remember that I had to really lean into it when we first got there to get that hinge to work. And my hat's off to the metal workers that did the cleaning of that and got it, looking pretty nice.
Okay, next question. What challenges did the roof of the Milton present, and how were they resolved with design and protective membrane?
Yeah, that was a real trick. Around the base of the tower goes straight up, and then on the sides there's step locations, and um, basically we built a frame over the top of the skylights, and then filled it with rigid insulation, and then there's a TPO membrane that runs up and over the tops of the walls, and there's a little cap that keeps the rain out and so forth. And that took a lot of effort to get it cleaned up, just to make sure that you're able um, to get good surfaces and so forth. It took quite a while to get it all stabilized, and every once in a while you get a leak in odd little corners or something because maybe the membrane's folded or something falls out of the sky. We did at one time on my own building. We had a hole in the roof. We couldn't figure out what it was, and pulled it out and it was a bullet hole. Somebody shot something up in the air and it came down and hit our roof. We didn't have that at the Milton, but it's just interesting what, you know, falls in and can make a cut or something. But anyway, it was tedious and difficult, but the roofers did a nice job with it. I mean, I didn't stand up there while they were doing that. I just remember that it would took a long time to get it stabilized, and but
Mhm.
it was basically rigid insulation, pitch to drains, and the TPO roof. Okay.
Okay, next question. How have you addressed the air conditioning and fire suppression system in this large open public space?
Yeah, that was a very interesting approach. Um, we had to locate the sprinkler heads in certain spots, and they worked in with the painting. You know,
Hmm.
there were little areas that we could kind of hide them in there because you can't paint the heads of the sprinklers. And I can really appreciate that question because that was really a trick. Above the domes, we ran the sprinkler systems up there, and you can walk in from a spot from the side of the dome. Um, I think it's like we call it 4A. It was just an interstitial space where all the mechanical systems were. Um, but we located them, you know, with special spots in the painting that we could hide them. And on the side walls, that was kind of tricky also. Um, we went behind the stone wherever we could. There were little cavities and things. And in some cases, we had to expose the sprinkler system. There was just no way around it. And so what we did is we just kind of tucked it up as best we could in the corners in ceilings that were fairly high, and we painted them the same color as the background. We didn't have to do it in areas of decorative paint, so it made it a little easier. Um, yeah, Rob McKay and I spent quite a bit of time working with that, you know. And again, we just worked together with it. What would be acceptable? What can we do? And so we had the sprinkler guys and us up there, and we just worked ways around it. When we found a way that you couldn't get around it, we exposed it, and we just made notes and took pictures, and that was just part of the way it worked.
Hmm. Okay, next question. Beside the elevator inspector, was the city's building inspector, fire marshal, etc., supportive?
Yeah, I think everybody was very supportive. I mean, they did their jobs, and you know, and we also had to have, you know, historic standards
Yeah.
met. So putting mechanical systems in on either side of the second floor where some tenant spaces were, there wasn't enough room for ductwork in some of the sprinkler systems, and because they had to cross and so forth. So what we did is held the drops. Well, it wasn't a drop ceiling there. It was a drywall ceiling, and we had a little access points all over the place. But it at the arches on either side of the stairways, we took the bulkhead and ran it above the arch, and then went back 3 or 4 feet, or as far as we could go before the step happened to hide the systems. In some cases, we had them, they tapered them down or whatever, so that we didn't, um, you know, ruin the spatial feeling in that main space. But it was a trick.
Okay, next question. Are the residential space filled?
The minute it opened, everything was filled, and there was a 20-person waiting list.
Wow.
In the process, we had to go through, Mark hired a marketing firm to assess the situation. Who had a lot of experience with downtown housing, and they wanted to have um, two smaller size units. One was called a studio, and one was a micro unit. Because people that worked at Kellogg Company or worked downtown and so forth, young people, um, needed a place to stay, and it'd be not, we wanted it to be a walkable community. So people in the Milton would, you know, go around downtown, and they can run or bicycle on the linear path, and They could kayak in the river, which is, just, like 100 yards away. And they needed to be able to have something that was affordable. So we actually went to the zoning board and got approval of the studio and micro units because they were too small to qualify under typical zoning laws. And so that, everybody was very supportive. They understood what the issue were, and as long as we met certain concerns, it was able to happen. And again, the persistence of Mark Harmson and the whole team of trying to get these things to work was very effective. And the micro units in the studios, I mean, you just can't get them. They're always booked. I'm not sure right now it's been, let's see, it was open in 22, so it's been a couple of years. Um, from what I understand, the occupancy is still very good, or it may still be full. I remember when it used to be when it was a unit that came open, people were running over there trying to get it. Um, in the addition of the retail, they're looking at, doing things on that first floor on the other side. Now we got the United Federal Credit Union on the west side, and on the east side, I know that they've been talking to a tenant for that as well. Those are the only spaces that aren't built out. In the south wing, um, that has not been built out on the second floor yet. That space is still available.
Mm.
Okay.
Okay, next question. Are those elements on the building parapet panel antennas for communication? Did the local or state historic commissions approve them?
They were there ahead of time. There are cell towers, and they've been there forever. And the other tower in town has them as well. And most tall buildings have them. And I mean, we're not excited that it's there, but they were there, and um, they're a little distraction, but that's the way it is. That does bring quite a bit of income to the building as well.
Okay, next question. Did the project use a federal investment tax credit or any other tax credits or financial supports?
We used the historic tax credits, the federal ones for sure, and those amounted to probably about 7.8 million. Um, and then, like I said, I think there were brownfield tax credits that were used. I didn't participate in the financial stack. It was a very complicated thing. Um, but I'm pretty sure that they were syndicated and all kinds of things happened. I think they used Plant Moran and the folks that usually give the presentations to MHPN. I think that Mark used that whole group because they were very familiar with how these things work. Um, I'm sure that every kind of incentive there was used, you know.
Okay, and just a note to everyone that there's a Michigan House Bill 5430 that's aiming at expanding the current state tax credit. If you could contact your legislator and speak up, that would be really helpful. If you wanted more information, please check our website. And I think there's one more question that came in the chat. So this is Maria Taylor, a historic preservationist and city council member in Farmington.
Okay.
And they have a similar building that they are trying to find developers for. And
Um,
so this is a project, the winery building, which was once the finest DUR station in the country. And they want to know like what happened between the 90s and 2017 that enabled it to be redeveloped? I mean, I think you mentioned a little bit about the public awareness and so would you like to talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, it isn't real clear. I mean, I know that a couple of people, like I mentioned, the one team that purchased it for a while and they couldn't get it to go. A couple other developers got in and then got out real fast because they couldn't get the numbers to work. Um, Luckily, it's such a huge building and it's fairly well constructed. And it wasn't going to fall down on its own or anything. Um, it was just persistence on the local community to be able to do this. Um, and Art Door owned it for a period of time, and he had a couple of local people that kind of did some kind of maintenance, and so that when he owned it, the roof wasn't quite as bad. But um, it's just by luck and the will of God, I think that it happened. Um, the important thing, I guess, is that you just have to have the right developer, and he has to tie into the community. If developers are a lot of times perceived as people that are just making big money and all this kind of stuff. They don't care about things. But you have to find one who really cares about the building and really sees that vision and is willing to put the effort in. It is a lot of effort, a lot of time, and so forth to do
Mhm.
that. But they also have to get paid for it. So you have to work out a way to do it. And it's all, working, uh, trying to see where the community can come up with things to help support.
Okay, oh, I think we have one last question. Have the people been inspired by the return of the Milton and are considering additional downtown preservation projects in Battle Creek?
Yes. Um, the on the other, let's see, like a couple blocks away to the west, um, the buildings, have been all rehabbed and in pretty good shape, and we got an urban farm grocery store that's coming in. Sprout Urban Farms is what it's called, and um, they basically provide, fruits and vegetables to the local community, and they do it various farming approaches. And that little grocery store is being built out right now in one of the buildings on the first floor, and there's apartments going above. Downtown housing is an unmet need, and it seems like the housing anybody that builds out housing in the downtown has been met with success. So it has spurred on new development. There's been a lot of people that have set up businesses and they weren't really good business people and they went out of business, fairly quickly. But there's interest enough, and most of the storefronts are full or in the process of being filled. I have a little open space in my own building downtown. We have a four-story structure, and it took you the historic tax credits to rehabilitate that. And we right now have an open spot. We had a tenant that moved out and wanted to move down to the other end of the street, where closer to the Milton, where there was more activity, they thought. So, those things happen over time. And but anyway, it seems like that has been working out well. We have a pretty good downtown development director that helps with that kind of thing. And there's incentives that the downtown development group can bring some money to the table, and there are incentives for um, downtown housing. And I think with MISTA, so much per unit that they will come in with grants, and then there's low interest loans and a bunch of other things. You just have to do the research.
Great. We're going to end it by reading a note from our founding member, Janet Krieger. Randy, this is a very good presentation and thank you. And we are happy to have you as a longtime leader of MHPN and be recognized with your Lifetime Achievement Award. And
That's
thank you
very nice.
so much, Randy. And just a reminder to everybody that this webinar is being recorded. You will receive an email in the next couple of days when the recording is available. And before I let everybody go, we would like to quickly announce our next webinar in September. It's scheduled for September 19th at 1 p.m. It is an introduction to the Michigan Main Street program, and we hope to see you all next time. Thank you.